Before we start this show, just a word from our sponsor, 20 by 20 Apparel. Founded in 2015, 20 by 20 Apparel brings original tributes to pro wrestling's classic arenas, moments, and events. They look to spotlight the bloopers, bleeps, and body slams along with the biggest, smallest, strangest, and strongest that pro wrestling has had to offer. Along with their awesome line of pro wrestling apparel, they do offer many services. In the world of wrestling, there are hundreds of shirts, promotions, flyers, social media accounts, and ads. Don't get lost in the sea of parody shirts and display fonts. They can provide professional graphic design services at a reasonable price. 20 by 20 also hand screen prints all the tees in-house. If you would like to discuss possible run of tees, posters, koozies, foam fingers, or whatever, drop them a line. Go to 20 by 20 Apparel. That's the number 20x, the number 20 apparel.com. Now, let's get to the show.
Fresh is the word.
I'm Jim Duggan, got long wood for plenty hoes. I keep it fresher than fresh, but you already know. You suckers bummy, I'm money, I got a ton of flows. My weed loud like a motherfucking thunder roll. Your shit quiet like you ballin' on a budget though. We see your kicks and we laugh and yellin' what are those. You see me shining like a suit on puffy. You know my grind and shit is too strong, buddy. That's why the dude call money. I be stuntin' like it's nothing at all. Cause it's nothing to me, it's probably something to y'all. Trying to smoke like me, then come and fuck with your dog. Got a closet full of kicks, you can't cop at the mall. And I'm fresher than the freshest, you can tell it's in my essence. Bitch, you see the way I'm rapping, yes I do this shit to death. I tell I'm running out of breath, I tell somebody cut a check. But either way you know it's fresh, and either way you know it's fresh. Fresh, we fresh. Fresh, goddammit, we fresh.
Welcome to the Fresh is the Word podcast. I'm your host, Kelly K. Fresh Frazier. And on Fresh is the Word, we like to deliver wisdom through great stories from the minds of bright creatives of pop culture. Through those stories, we like to dissect the journey of our guests and present actionable lessons and advice for our listeners, no matter what career or avenue of artistry they pursue. And before we get into this episode, I want to give a shout out to Knox Money, Bang Belushi, and Foulmouth for the theme music for Fresh is the Word. And if you would like to support the podcast, you can always go to freshisthepodcast.com and just share any of the links for any of the episodes on any of your social media platforms. And also, you can subscribe to Fresh is the Word pretty much anywhere that podcasts are streamed. And that includes Apple Podcast, Spotify, Stitcher Radio, pretty much everywhere. And please rate and review, especially on Apple Podcasts. It will definitely help out the show. If you want to contact me, you can always reach me by email at djkfresh@gmail.com. Or you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at KFresh is the Word, and on Facebook at facebook.com/KFresh. And you can also follow Fresh is the Word on Twitter at Fresh is the Word, and that's is with an IZ, Instagram at Fresh is the Word Podcast, and Facebook at facebook.com/Fresh is the Podcast. And this is episode 153. The guest for this episode is New York City-based comic book writer Richard Douek, who has a couple new titles with Rotobones #1, premiering last week via IDW Publishing, and then Wailing Blade #1 coming this week via Comics Tribe. In the past, Douek wrote the Gutter Magic and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles universe books on IDW Publishing, along with being an award-winning copywriter in advertising. During our chat, we talked about Road of Bones and Wailing Blade, along with creating universes, the real-world parallels of his stories, and the spectrum of horror writing. And before we get into this interview with Richard Douek, I definitely wanted to remind you about how you can support Fresh is the Word. I do have a Patreon account set up now at patreon.com/Fresh is the Word. And for as little as $1, you can support Fresh is the Word. And there's a lot of different tiers that you can help support Fresh is the Word. Some that you can be contributing and a part of the podcast itself. And then also for the $3 a month tier, I will be opening my long, extensive audio archives of interviews that I've done outside the podcast all pretty much music related. For exclusive Patreon only podcast episodes from, my past. I already have a couple up. A Danny Brown interview from 2008 and a Cool Keith interview from 2010. And I'm going to work hard this week to get a couple more up. Just go to patreon.com/kfresh. And like I said, for as little as $1, you can help out. All right, let's get into this interview with Richard Douek. You reached out to me about coming on the podcast. Definitely in this comic creator universe, everybody kind of knows each other. So you recognize some people I had on the podcast already, and you have a couple books coming out in May. Wailing, Blad, and Road of Bones. Talk about those titles.
Well, they're two very different books. Wailing Blad is I guess like a science fiction epic, we were kind of describing it as Mad Max meets Game of Thrones, kind of, because it's takes place really far in the future, but it's after kind of the fall of a golden age of mankind. So it's even though it's the future, things are very feudal and primitive. It's almost like a feudal world with some remnants of technology. And the ruler of the world uses this technology to oppress people. And through one of them is this thing called the Wailing Blade, which is this huge technological sword that's wielded by one of his executioners. So the whole story is about the hero, this guy Tyken. His father gets sentenced to be executed by the Wailing Blade, and he's got to figure out a way to defeat this fearsome executioner called the Head Taker. So that's Wailing Blade. Road of Bones is way more of a horror story, and it's set actually in in a historic period around the 1950s in the Russian Gulag, and it's about this guy Roman who's been imprisoned for 20 years for making a bad joke about Stalin. And it's 20 years of hard labor in Siberia, and the work camp he's at is on this highway that's called the Road of Bones, because basically the ground in the tundra is so frozen, right, that the work conditions were so horrible, people were dying all the time, but the ground is so frozen that it would take too much time to dig graves for them, so they just threw them in the foundation of the road and paved it over. And this is a real place, in the real world. You can, if you want to go to Siberia, you can travel on the Road of Bones. It's pretty crazy. So anyway, so this guy is in prison, and he gets the chance to escape. A couple of prisoners approach him about joining them on an escape, and he goes along with it, and then finds out that they might have some really sinister intentions for bringing him along. So yeah, those are the two books. It's kind of funny how it happened that they're coming out within a week of each other, because I've been working on Wailing Blade for a couple of years now. Road of Bones just was picked up much more recently, and we just kind of shot into high gear producing that, and but. So it's nice. It's kind of a 1-2 punch for me in May.
Nice. How are they coming out?
Well, they'll both be out in comic stores and digitally on Comixology. So the way comics work, to start, they're going to come out issue by issue. So each one is a 4-part miniseries. So it'll be one issue a month, and that'll be throughout the summer, and then we'll do a collected edition in probably in the fall, around September or October, that collects the whole story in a softcover or hardcover book. But yeah, if you have a local comic store or a web store, that's how you get a print edition of it. But if you don't, or if you prefer to read digitally, it'll be available on Comixology. They both will.
Whether it's these two titles or anything else that you've done in the past, what? The cops.
Sorry about that. That's the fire department there going by. So
It's all good.
it's one of the perils of being in New York. There's just,
Right.
there's loud stuff happening.
There's always some noise going on.
Yeah. But anyway, sorry. What was the question?
Okay. Whether it's these two titles or anything else that you've written, what's the sort of idea behind, what's your motivation in regards to just like the bare bones of the stories, whether it's the era of time, the place, stuff like that,
Mm-hmm.
where do you get your inspiration from?
From all over. I mean, it's funny. I was talking to somebody about my first series that I did. That was called Gutter Magic. Came out a couple of years ago, and the story there, it's about a guy who basically he wants to become a wizard, but in the world he lives in, wizards, it's like a bloodline thing, kind of like Harry Potter. You're either born with it or not. You can't learn it, but he just really wants to do it, and he's kind of dedicated his whole life to try to buy, borrow, or steal a way to get this magic. And it's not like I kind of set out to do it at the time, but looking back at what I was doing there and what was going on in my life, I was working a day job in the advertising industry where I was doing graphic design and layouts and stuff, and it wasn't really super creative work, and I wanted to move over into doing copywriting and art direction and stuff where it was a little bit more of being able to execute my own ideas rather than kind of design, sort of have this thing slapped down in front of me and said, okay, well, do this, and this. I wanted to be on the more creative side of it, and it was something I had struggled with for years because I didn't go to college for that, I didn't go to school for that, and I felt like everybody who was doing it had this kind of edge on me, this pedigree that I wouldn't be able to overcome. So in a weird way, what inspired Gutter Magic, even if I didn't completely realize it at the time, was those struggles I was going through with feeling there was this thing I wanted to do and not being able to do it. So I think that kind of comes up a lot in my life. It's the things that are going on in my head and in my life that I just kind of try to even if whether I plan it or I don't, it always kind of works its way in to the stories. I don't know what that says with Road of Bones being a horror story, but nothing particularly horrific going on in my life. But yeah, I think that Road of Bones came about where I was just sort of researching about prison escapes in general, because that's a kind of story I've enjoyed before, like in movies and books and things like that. And I had a completely separate idea that was not historical at all, but I kind of started delving into these stories about the Gulag and what life was like there and what some of these people went through to escape. And that was just I was wow, that's really interesting. And I think there's a story there that I've never seen told quite this way before. So yeah, I would say it's I'm less of the kind of person who right. gets an idea where I'll say okay, I'm pissed off at Donald Trump, so I'm gonna write something that has to do with politics, in a way, or I'm pissed off with a certain issue, or I want to address a certain issue. I kind of just sort of have ideas, and then real life kind of works its way into them during my process.
I think that's the fun thing about comic books, is that you can play around with the things that in your life maybe are not possible or are impossible even, and sort of play around with them and maybe even find a happy medium in there, even in the short term. What do you learn during that process? And is there anything that you like some happy medium? Did you ever were able to sort of progress from the place that you were at because you found something writing these titles?
I love like kind of creating the worlds that these like stories live in, like almost as much as I love creating the stories themselves. You know, like I was always like growing up, I was into like D&D and like other like role playing games and stuff like that. And like, you know, for like those games, it's like, you know, you kind of get this book where like, okay, this is the world, and there's like 8 million people. Sorry, I'm on the phone. There's like 8 million people, you know, in this world, and like, you know, you're not going to use all of it, but like it's all there. You know what I mean? It's almost like you kind of have this like whole like world laid out, and I love like doing stuff like that where it's like I'll write like notebooks worth of like you know, stuff about like, you know, areas and regions of the world and people that aren't even ever going to be in there, but it's like kind of like I know they're there, and like that kind of makes the world like a little bit more real. And like for me anyway, like as I'm writing it, and then it's also sort of like a nice resource I can draw upon, like you know, if I am writing and then I'm like, oh hey, remember that thing I wrote like a couple of weeks ago? Maybe I could bring that in here, you know. And I think like that's kind of like the happy medium is like kind of like realizing like when it's time to stop doing that and actually like start working on the story, you know? Because no, I mean like I used to do this a lot, and I know a lot of like writers do this a lot. Like when they're starting out, is like, you know, you kind of like you're doing all this background, and you're like, okay, well, you know, if everyone, you know, in order to like understand the story, you know, they're going to need to know like who so-and-so's father is and who his father is and what the name of the horse was, you know, back then. And it's like, you know, I think the more you like do it, the more you realize that it's like, you know, yeah, you know, you don't need all that stuff, right? It's like the readers can still get it. I feel like they'll come along with you for like a lot less than you think they need. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's like, so you can kind of get stuck in this like cycle where you're just doing the backstory and not realizing that like the backstory stuff is like, yeah, it's all great and it's all like nice to have, but it's not like what you need to like make a story that's like, you know, going to engage people and that people are going to love. So it's like, I think like that was like a big struggle for me. It was like when I was first starting, was kind of realizing that it's like, okay, well, it's like all this stuff, all this work, it's like I'm doing it like just to get myself comfortable. I'm not doing it because like, you know, it like needs to be done or the story is going to be like garbage. It's like, you know, you can start writing the actual thing and then like, you know, you just go back and edit, you know,
right.
Or like you like, you know, you say like, oh, I do need this or I do need that, you know. So it's like, I still love doing it, but like at the same time, I just kind of had to get to the place where I was like actually like writing the actual thing and not be like the story about the story, you know.
Right.
That makes sense.
With Wailing Blade, what's sort of like the societal parallels with that title? What's what's the underlying theme of that?
Well, Wailing Blade, yeah, you know, in a weird way, it's like I guess kind of like a lot of people today kind of think of our society as like a society like in decline, you know, that there was like kind of this past golden age that we're supposed to get back to, and everything new that comes out is like, you know, just worse and horrible. I don't agree with that yet. The world of Wailing Blade, it's like this is like an actual thing. Like in the world of Wailing Blade, you know, mankind like rose to the stars, had this like huge interstellar empire, and basically like you know, hundreds of years, thousands of years in the past, it all came crashing down. So there was this golden age, and now in the present day of Wailing Blade, it's almost like a future dark age. It's almost like parts of Europe after the fall of Rome, you know, or Greece. Like, it's very like, you know, feudal, like a lot of warlords, might makes right. And there's this one tyrant who rules over like the region that the book takes place in. And the way he does it is by like monopolizing all the technology from this past golden age to kind of lord it over the people. Like, so like he's the only one who has access to these things, you know, like a lot of them are weapons, some of them are environmental things, but that's basically like how he maintains control over the people. And like a lot of the main characters are kind of like a band of people who are rebelling against this and trying to get some technology of their own, and they're like labeled as bandits, you know. Yeah. Really what they're doing is like doing what they have to do to like fight against this oppression. So like, you know, like real world parallels, it's like, it's not that I think that like there was this like, you know, past golden age that like we're supposed to return to, but it's like I do think we're like kind of in a time right now where things are very like oppressive and feudal in a weird way. It's like, you know, we live a lot of our lives kind of you know, whether it's like dealing with like debt or you know, our leaders doing like not serving us, serving themselves. It's almost like, you know, the huge gap of like inequality where like, you know, you've got a huge amount of people trying to scrape by, living like day to day, and then you have this other class of people who like don't have a care in the world, right, or want in the world, and they could give up like half of what they have and still live exactly the same, but they're never going to do that. You know, so it's like there's like those are like kind of like the similarities between like Wailing Blade's world and our world, is that there's this like kind of huge gulf between like the ruling class, the class that's making the decisions for like, you know, how everyone's going to live their life, and kind of like everyone else. And I think that's kind of why it's like that's like part of like why it resonated for me, is because it's like it's you know, it's science fiction, it's like, you know, weird, but it's kind of like rooted in like things that are, you know, very important, like and like happening now.
With Road of Bones, you tackle more of a horror genre, and the horror genre does have a wide spectrum. You know, where does that sort of fit into the spectrum of horror?
I'd say it's more like it's kind of like on the like psychological, like survival horror kind of end of the spectrum, where it's like it's not so much about like, it's not like a Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street kind of horror. You know what I mean? It's like I feel like it's the sort of horror where like, you know, the more you like look into like what it was like living like in the gulag, like, you know, like that's a horror story, you know. Like I've read accounts, I've read books about it, and it's like you read it and it was really, it's almost like you don't have to like embellish it. Like that's like horror, you know what I mean? Right. So it's like, and then you think about like Siberia, like just like the, you know, just the brutal conditions there. Even if you weren't in prison, it's like what it takes to survive there. Like, you know, again, maybe not like horror, but it is definitely extreme. So I think for like Road of Bones, it's like it's less about like you know a boogeyman or something, or like some like a monster, and it's more about just sort of like how conditions like that can kind of like dehumanize you, you know, and like dehumanize like everybody that's involved, and like kind of like the horror of that. Like there's a supernatural creature in Road of Bones, but kind of, and I'm not going to like spoil anything, but I'm just going to say that like, you know, it's not clear through like most of the story whether this is like an actual creature or if this is just the main character just sort of being driven to the point where he's like hallucinating this creature because it's like kind of like a weird comfort to him. It's almost like his imaginary friend helping him, you know? So it's like, so for me, like Road of Bones is more like, it's just about like the horror of what happens to people when they are confronted by a situation that is just like beyond extreme and beyond like terrible. And I kind of find that's like, you know, a little different than, you know, being chased around the summer camp by an immortal zombie. So, you know,
Right.
So yeah, I would say like it's that kind of horror. And like the other reason it's like, I feel like it's more like psychological than slasher is because it's like slasher stuff's like really hard to do in comics, like at least like a traditional slasher movie, because it's like you don't have like, you know, you can't like kind of crank up the creepy music right before Jason's about to strike. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You can't have like the kind of thing where it's like where like everything's quiet and then you turn a corner and then a door slams open and you know like there's nothing that's gonna like kind of make you jump out of your seat like when you turn a page. You know, it's just not that kind of medium. So it's like I think like with comics, it's like you kind of have to like have the horror be like kind of like the atmosphere of it and like the psychological aspect and like putting yourself in the shoes of like the people dealing with it. So like that's what I was really trying to get at there. It was like, you know, this just kind of like just really creepy, horrific situation that like, you know, it is like sort of like inevitably plotting towards something really terrible and like you can see it coming, but you can't see any way out of it. You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's like there's sort of like something like really kind of like nice and like terrifying there. But it's not the kind of like terrifying, like jump out of your skin terrifying. It's more of like the skin crawling kind of like, oh my God, I can't believe what I just read. Kind of terrifying.
I always like to ask this question in my interviews is, what's a nugget of knowledge, a lesson that you have learned over your career, life, that anybody listening to this, no matter what avenue of artistry that they're in, that they could project into their own life?
Don't be afraid to suck.
Yes.
And like
failure.
And what I mean by that is like don't not do something because you feel like it's not going to be perfect. You know what I mean? Like you know, if you're writing a short story and like it's not perfect, it's like doesn't matter. You know, like nobody ever has to see it. Like you know, you're writing a comic strip, you're doing sketches. It's like, you know, a lot of them are going to suck. It's like, you know, it's not just like a starting out thing, you know, like people who've been doing it for years have off days and, you know, and not everything they have to do. It's like, you can always like go back and edit it and you can always get better. And you shouldn't let like a fear of like that it's not going to like live up to like what you have in your head. You shouldn't like let the fear of that stop you from doing it. It's like, just do it. And if it turns out great, awesome. You got a great thing. If it doesn't turn out great, if it's not meeting your expectations, then number one, nobody has to see that except you. You know, you can put it in a file, revisit it like, you know, a year later. Number two, nothing aside from sculptures are set in stone. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, you write a script, it's not working. you can edit that script. You do drawing, it's not working. You can do another draft. You can, use your eraser. And it's like, the whole point is that it's like, becoming a creator and like, whatever you're making is like, it's a process. It's not like, there's no finish line. There's nothing in my past where there was like a day where I said like, yes, I'm finally a writer. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like, I learn new things with every project. I learn new things with every page I put down. It's like, so you just sort of have to like engage with the process and just realize that it's going to get messy at times, and that you're not God's gift to writing or whatever. You're going to mess up, but everybody messes up. You know what I mean? Like, take your favorite comic book writer in the world, and I guarantee you, they've got a project that they completely hate because they feel like they didn't give it their best, or they've got an old draft of a script of something great that's like absolutely terrible, and then they just kept working on it until it was where they wanted to be. So it's like we kind of like see all this stuff from the outside when you're looking at like people you admire, and like you don't really see kind of the struggles people go through to like get to that level. So like, if I could just say anything to anybody, it's like everybody, it's just like, just do your thing and you'll get there. But you just, you got to run the race. You know what I mean? You're not gonna like start at the finish line, I guess is what I'm saying. And I kind of feel like some people get trapped in that loop where they feel like this isn't exactly what I want, so I'm not going to show it to anybody. I'm not going to like put it out there. It's like, you kind of got to put yourself out there a little bit, and it's okay if you're not like, amazing like right off the bat. Like you gotta get there.
Definitely.
Yeah.
And before we get out of here, I always like to end with the same question. Who's somebody that's been a part of your life or career that I could realistically interview for this podcast that would have some great stories or lessons to talk about?
It's fun. Like, can I give you? I think there's like two people. Like, number one would be, I think you should definitely talk to Joe Mulvey, my artist on Wailing, because he's like super hilarious, super smart, and like really like creative. And I think you're gonna have like you're gonna be laughing a lot if you have him on, because he's just like one of the funniest people I know. But it's like I can see maybe you don't want to like talk about like over and over again. So let me give you one other person who's like kind of not like directly involved with like these projects, and I would say there's this guy Andy Schmidt. He runs an online class called Comics Experience, and that's where like I learned how to write comic scripts, and it's like kind of grown into like this community of people who are like looking to like get into comics, and I found like like you do have to like pay for the courses, but like I thought they were worth it, and I think just like Andy just has like a passion for like being like an educator and like helping people kind of like get to where they want to be in terms of like their creative life. So it's like, because he has his own like projects, like he has his own comics, he has his own like writing stuff that he does, but like his main thing is like kind of like teaching classes and managing this community with people. So I think he'd be a great person to talk to, especially if like you have a lot of people who are listening to you and kind of like think they might want to get involved with comics, don't really know how to get started. I think like Andy's like a great interview.
Awesome. That sounds great. Before we get out of here, where can people go online to get more information about you and the comic books that you're working on? Well,
I'm on social media. I'm on Twitter and Instagram at @Douek. That's RDOUEK. I know it's a tough one, but it's, But if you see Douek somewhere on any kind of like social network, it's probably me. I think I've got most of them. But anyway, but I'm most active on Twitter and Instagram. That's where like I post like images and things about my work. I have a Facebook page. It's facebook.com/guttermagic. And even though it's called Gutter Magic, that's also like my Facebook kind of like home base where like I post about all my stuff. So you can go there. I have a website at rdouek.com. Not a ton there, but if you want to check it out, you can, and you'll find like links to my work and stuff like that. But I would say Twitter is probably like my number one place that like I'm online, and I love talking to people. So, follow me and shoot me a question or anything, and I'm here.
All right, that was my interview with Richard Douek. More information and links onto where you can follow everything that he's been working on and to purchase Road of Bones and Wailing Blade are all in the show notes for this episode at freshasthepodcast.com. All right, thank you for listening once again. Goodbye and good night.
Fresh is the word.